Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the singer-songwriter and author Dan Stuart, who I spoke to very recently, all the way in Tucson, Arizona. One-time member of Green on Red, and has just brought out his third book in a trilogy, this one is titled Marlowe's Revenge. It sort of follows, well, obviously the first two. So we talk about that, the band, music, creativity. So this is the interview. I've left the first bit in, which is really talking about where he's living now and a bit about that world. You get the gist. You know, you can skip this if you really want to, the first 5 minutes, but I thought it was quite interesting and it made me smile. Anyway, we were just talking about Las Vegas, national parks, and then he got down to where he's living in Tucson. Anyway, Dan, take over, for God's sake, now.
One thing that's funny about Oaxaca, where I lived, is that in the United States, that trip you're talking about, doing a big circle, using sort of Vegas as the epicenter. You can do that all in Oaxaca and see the same drastic geographical changes in about 8 hours.
I know.
So it's like the American Southwest compressed into this area. But one of the main reasons I came back is how much because I had spent 5 years about in Oaxaca and then, 3 in Mexico City. And I really missed nature. I was going sort of crazy because, I've lived in mega cities. I've lived in LA, I've lived in New York, I've lived in Mexico City. And the problem, I spent almost a year in London too. And as you know, it's very difficult to escape on a day trip when you're in the middle of a city like that.
Mm-hmm.
It takes you to leave the city. So here, and when I lived in Oaxaca also, is if I go in an hour direction anywhere from Tucson, I'm in a different sort of world, and I've got grasslands sort of that look like Montana to the southeast. I've got the Sonoran Desert right here. I mean, I'm a 10-minute bike ride, 15-minute bike ride away from Saguaro National Park, west. And, I back up to the Santa Cruz River right where I am right now, which is along the banks is where the original sort of indigenous crop fields were.
Mm-hmm.
I miss it. And so it's been very gratifying to be able to be back in an area of the world that's super special as far as its fauna, its landscape. And we have sky islands, we call them, which is where the mountains, Mount Lemmon, which is, it would take me probably 90 minutes to drive up there. That's 8,500 feet high.
Right.
So, I don't know what that is in meters, pardon me. But oh no, you're a Brit.
Yes.
You'd get, yeah. But so it's just and then also, with everything that's going on, as far as not just COVID is just like sort of a rehearsal for climate change. And last summer we had just a brutal, we're in the middle of a really bad drought. And last summer it was unbearably hot. Like starting right now, I'm outside, it's beautiful, it's 90 and dry. But last year it would have been 105 degrees right now. And it lasted all into October. So old desert rats that used to always sort of poo-poo anybody complaining about stuff. It scared them last year. So I think maybe we'll get to the point just through sheer fear when people start experiencing things directly, they'll maybe start paying attention a little bit more to what's at stake,
Mm.
you know,
Yes.
instead of it just being a theory or, I mean, you're lucky you don't have the rampant anti-intellectualism that is, you know, has always been a part of the United States. And now it's just, obviously with the last administration just gave it so much permission to be as stupid as possible. Ignorance is considered a beautiful thing in some circles here.
Yes. It
So
was.
it's going to be a battle, it's going to be something that the kids are going to have to try to figure out.
Yes. Well, or just rely on Elon Musk, really.
Oh, well, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, a guy like him, I don't know. And we have to, I mean, do nation states matter anymore? I say they do, right? I say that they're our best bet. I don't want the Gates Foundation curing malaria. I want the United Nations to do that through the World Health Organization and stuff. This whole idea, in my country, I think Thatcher did the same thing as Reagan, but Reagan literally said that government has no answers, that it's the problem. I mean, that's just an awful thing to say. And then he gutted public education. That public here is the free school. And so now we have a electorate that, as George Carlin, our great comedian, once said, think about how stupid the average person is and realize half the population is dumber than that. So it's going to be, it's really hard. It's been rough. It's been, I mean, I don't know what the difference would be between here and, I mean, Boris, he's an oaf and all of that and on purpose and all of that. But I mean, to me, it's impossible for anybody to be less sort of, I imagine Boris still has some sort of curiosity about things, right?
Yeah.
Where we had a president that had no curiosity about anything, And if you don't wake up interested in this world, and if you don't accept and know what you don't know, I mean, there's just no hope, right? So we're all kind of relieved over here that we've got this guy that seems so far to understand what the major issues are and to at least come to them with some sort of rational approach based on reality.
Yes. Well, I would imagine, yes, I would imagine he's had quite a clear-up act to do to sort it out.
Well, they don't talk about it much, but so many people retired within federal and also the state houses. So many people retired under his administration because it was just unbearable. So we have a lot of things are gutted, where there's no professionals there anymore, no experts, and everything from the State Department down, and he, how do you convince people that public service is worth it again? How do you put meaning and value into something that's been so denigrated now, really since, I don't know, around 2008, I guess. It's been the Tea Party movement, but it's been happening for a long time. It goes back to Reagan. Of course, I live in Arizona, which is the John Birch Society came out of Phoenix, and so
Yes.
that there's a huge history of reactionary craziness, and then Tucson used to be the real liberal place, right? We used
Mhm.
to be Udall, which you probably don't know him, but the Udall family were really solid Democrat environmentalists. He ran for president a couple times. And then Phoenix was Barry Goldwater, who, is one of the giants of the previous conservative sort of movement, what used to be conservatism in this country, which is gone. I mean, he would recognize and he would be horrified, you know. So it's just it's a dangerous. I always say, I grew up with people had bumper stickers on cars. You know that when you're driving, doing those drives out of
Yeah.
Vegas. And bumper stickers have just disappeared because people are scared to, and bumper stickers, the odds of a bumper sticker, if it's not funny, it used to be pretty much, usually I would say half of all bumper stickers back in the day were political in some way, maybe in a funny way, maybe whatever, but it was making some sort of political statement. Now people, nobody puts anything on their car because they're afraid they're going to get shot. You know, I mean, truthfully. So the conversation just isn't happening, and we're not ready for it. It's a country of children. I mean, we are. We're a country of. I was hoping we would make it to adolescence.
Did you have optimism with Barack Obama? Did that feel like you woke up and thought, blimey, this is quite different now?
It was a magical moment, and it was transcendent. But the problem happened is that the obstructionism against him, because those first midterms, that's when the Tea Party really got into Congress. And he also was prevented from, he had all of the, you have this ingrained racism where Black males aren't allowed to be angry ever, right? They're not allowed to be, I mean, they vilified him for wearing a tan suit, So he never really had a chance outside of just sort of being a very important symbol for the rest of the world, right?
Mm.
So for people like me, it was a disappointment because we wanted things to change faster. And I mean, we pay 20% of our GDP for healthcare, and we don't even have universal coverage. You guys probably are paying 8% or something, and you have the National Health Service.
Yeah, that's right.
Great. And I don't know what the homeless situation is like in the UK, but here, I can't even describe it. How many people are just lost that will have no chance. And just like COVID, because the morgue trucks weren't coming around with a loudspeaker saying, "Bring out your dead." I mean, that's what the right wanted to see for them to accept that there was a real issue here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because everything else is just fake. It's just, there is no objective reality, and it's all just this it's this paranoid view of the world, right? And so there's no authoritative sources. Google's a big problem because back in the day before they went public, their page ranking was based on authoritative sources. So universities and things got very high. But now it's all based on, consumerism.
Yeah.
And a good example I tell people is Google best dog food. And there's got to be data out there that really shows what are the best companies for what is the, but I spent an hour the other day and I couldn't make heads or tails of what sort of dog food was better than another dog food. It's impossible. So if you can't do it with dog food, how the fuck are we supposed to do this with vaccination?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it's hard. It's hard. And at the same time, maybe what'll save us is one-to-one human contact again somehow.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, the music business is no longer a business. It's a music community now, good, bad, or indifferent. So we'll see what happens with that. I come out of the last era where there was still a music business. There was still publishing money. There was still, the objective was to be signed to a major and,
Sure.
Go wag your weenie for the masses, but now it's a very sort of, I have contemporaries, I won't name any names, that have like 50 records, it's like 50 solo records. It's like, how can you make 50 records? I mean, do you really have that much to say? But that happens because, you need to record to feed your Uber fans, so it's not about increasing your audience. It's about staying with who's with you and feeding that. And I don't think that's healthy. No, I've made 4 solo records in 30 years, and you could argue that's 3 too many.
Yes. So it's sort of interestingly, because I mean, the band was based in Tucson. I mean, what was your, the formative years when you were sort of growing up? Because I was born 64. I'm now in my more than late 50s. I mean, it was kind of the glam period, and then luckily David Bowie was my first single and my first love. What was kind of your kind of formative kind of early teen?
Sort of similar. My family my dad was an immigrant from Australia, and we wound up here in 67. He was a high jumper, and he got to the United States on a track scholarship. And he came from very modest means in Lismore, which is on the border of Queensland and New South Wales. And we wound up here because they had just started a med school, and he had become a professor of neurophysiology because a lot of the jocks got into physiology, So we're out here in 67, and of course, I'm 6 years old, and the counterculture is in full swing, and Tucson was just full of, very, very back then, very much a hippie, environment. I mean, this is Edward Abbey. I don't know if you know that writer. He was a huge environmental, one of the early guys, and Charles Bowden later. And we were a center of sort of this promise of that was going to happen. And we had driving around with my mom, AM radio, 1968 was tremendous. The top 40 in 1968 was just, everything from the Supremes to Bob Dylan, right? It was just great. And then, of course, later, around early 70s, when I was just becoming, puberty's hitting, and FM radio, man, what we call classic rock now, they would play the side of Procol Harum or something,
Right.
Salty Dog, they would play, obviously, Lou Reed, Bowie, but also redneck sort of hippie music like Lynyrd Skynyrd, all of that. So I was really lucky I got that, and then when that got sort of boring, as you say, glams, New York Dolls and stuff, and then punk hits. So punk was perfect. Punk hit when I was about 15 or 16, and
Right.
I'd sort of given up on rock and roll at that point a little bit. I think I was listening to a lot of jazz at that point, and probably bad jazz fusion, actually. If I'm gonna...
Weather Report. Were you listening to Weather Report?
And stuff? Yeah, he's not bad, but you know what I'm talking about. And then it was just, Tucson had this punk community that was like, all across the country, towns, especially university towns like Tucson, there would be a scene. So in Tucson, it was about 50 people, maybe 100 max with the Looky Loos. And I was in a band called Serfers with an E, Serfers. No, the. And we opened for all the West Coast punk bands, everybody from Black Flag to, to the Weirdos to Fear. And that's what sort of, I remember David Wiley from a band called Human Hands, which was kind of like the LA Talking Heads. And he said, you got to go to LA, you got to get out of Tucson and go to LA. And that's what I did. I got into legal trouble with a botched smashing grab at a music store, which is what I thought Pete Townsend would do if he needed a. And so I went out there, and they transferred my probation out to LA, and within a year, year or two, signed to Slash Records, Slash Warner.
Well, it was interesting you mentioned that, because I did an interview with the guy from the punk band called Eater, which no one's probably heard of in America, but they were a very young band, and they were like 14, 15, and they had no money. They were in London, and they were looking at this, record place selling musical instruments, and realized when the guy was kind of leaving or locking up about 4 o'clock, there was a window where they could just run in, grab something, and run like hell. And they got away with it in that case. So yes,
for them, that's what insurance is for. No, it's a horrifying thing to say. I mean, I had done one previously that I got away with, and I believe me, at this point, I'm not. I mean, come on, thievery is thievery. I hate thieves, and but it's a part of my past, and I think that I think that what's interesting about my story with that is it's a great example of white privilege, because if I would have been black or brown, I never would have been allowed to leave the state, right? And I probably would have gotten some sort of time and would be what they say part of the system, in the system at age 19. Instead, I was allowed to go out to LA and, play silly rock music all across the country. I mean, I used to mail in my probation reports from the road. They would allow me to do that. I went out there and I got a job. I got a job delivering office furniture and stuff. I made, I knew that what the judge wanted to see certain things. But the reason they allowed me to do that is because I was a white upper middle class kid. If I wasn't, that story would have been dramatically different.
Very different, very different. So wait, so how did your parents cope when they found out that you just did a smash and grab job?
They didn't know about it until much later. I kept that all quiet. Basically, I left the house at 18. I left actually on Father's Day. And I'm a terrible kid, self-righteous in the extreme. I should have been booted out years before. And but when punk was really happening, and we were, we had a fan base and stuff here, and I remember telling somebody, either my mom or my dad or somebody, this sounds just so pretentious. I said, this family's never had an artist. I'm going to be an artist. Dude, you can't even sing. We've heard you on that guitar. You can't even play. What the hell are you talking about? And yeah. So, but see, that's what was so beautiful about the punk days is they gave you permission. The whole thing was about. I mean, people. My son's about 23, and so when he was interested in all of this, he got into what he thought punk rock was at about age 12, I guess, 13. And he thought it was guitar music. mostly played by dudes.
Mm.
And I had to tell him, I said, no, that's that awful hardcore shit that came later. It kind of ruined everything. Like when Henry Rollins joined Black Flag, it was kind of over, right? There's
Yeah.
horrible macho posturing and bad poetry and all of it. But when I was into it, there was a lot of women in the scene, and there was a lot of odd instruments in the scene. Accordions, trumpets, whatever you wanted to do, if it was creative and you were committed to it, right? Because they call it being authentic now, which is a terrible word. Let's get rid of that word. But if you were into it and it was real, didn't matter what you were doing, you could do anything. And it was punk in my view, how I understand that word, But then it all changed, early 80s, and suddenly, it just became this like very, very hyper macho guitar music shit.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because I mentioned that band Eater and the lead singer, who I can't remember.
Name, by the way.
Pardon?
I know the band's name. I know that band. I don't know their music, but I know that they're called Eater. Go ahead.
But it was interesting because he said that after a couple of years, when he saw his audience and they all started to look like Sid Vicious and they had that look, he just thought, I don't even want to go on stage and perform to them. It's suddenly like, when did we have to sort of dress like Sid Vicious? I think that was his kind of moment where he just thought, my heart's not really into this anymore.
Become a cartoon, to become a caricature. Yeah. Yeah. The funny thing is by the time I was in LA, they were already sort of what they were calling a post-punk thing. That was the word that they used to use. And the original scene in Mask, that was like the Germs and stuff, and early X and all of that, that was run out of the Mask Club. It was run by a British guy, Brendan Mullen, was very important in the LA scene. And so we were younger, and then it was very easy for the critics to listen to some of that stuff and call it neo-psychedelic, or this return of the 60s. But the reason that was happening is because as you go about your, for lack of a better word, craft, you're going to start reflecting what you were influenced by, subconsciously or consciously, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, the other day I put on a Spirit, Randy California,
12 Dreams,
all of that, right? And I'm listening to it, and there were these little moments, musical interludes happening on everything from Fresh Garbage to all this other stuff. And I said, yeah, that was stuck in my head. I would go back in my own recording career and say, on this song, I think I was trying to reference that, and I didn't even know I was doing it, right? So that's just a natural thing. And it's not just music, obviously. Filmmaking, photographers, art, painters. You're a product of what was it's garbage in, garbage out, or beauty in, beauty out. You're a product of all of that. And so maybe it was more sort of calculated with other bands. But I can say that progression for Green on Red, from sort of quirky, kind of almost psychedelic stuff of those first two EPs, and then into the first Slash record where we're trying to write songs. And then it gets into Gas Food Lodging, which is sort of an embrace of blues and country. We didn't, first of all, we never had band meetings. When I had friends in other bands, and they would say, I got to go to the band meeting. It's like, what do you do at a band meeting? What do you talk about? When we got together, it was always to write new stuff, right? I got this idea. If there was a tour and we hadn't played for a while, we would go over songs that we were going to play,
mm-hmm.
right? But we never talked about strategy or, let's go call this record. We never did that. And that was maybe the punk part of it, because I tell people that kids that want to get into the business, or this is back in the day. I mean, now there is no, but you either get signed from the street, right? And you get signed because record companies are scared they're going to miss out on something happening.
Mm-hmm.
Or you get signed. The A&R departments in the old days were always on the 7th floor. So you go up the elevator and you know somebody, and it's kind of like an inside deal, right? So whatever always happened to us was from the street. It was always, and it was, a lot of it was based on criticism. Because for some reason, we got away with murder critically, right? Which really shouldn't have happened, because there was a lot of stuff that wasn't particularly compelling, that still nobody said, this is shit, right? So the record company, they would say, well, if we sign them and we just do this or that, or get them with the right producer, something will happen. Well, nothing ever happened, but we were allowed. I mean, I guess my point is Grin on Red made twice as many records as they probably should have. And there was different parts of it. There was the initial band, then there was the initial band with Chuck, when Chuck joined around 1984, Chuck Prophet. And then I fired my best friends and went on with Chuck and made a few more records. So there was like 3 eras of it. And when we're right now, we're right in the middle of doing reissues. And so we'll be doing 3 box sets. And that's how we're going to break it up, right? And whether that's overkill, yeah, it's probably overkill. So I'm a total hypocrite because I'm serving those Uber fans, right? We're people that actually give a shit. Because there's not going to be any new. I mean, although I gotta say, whenever the kids, the 80s are kind of popular right now, and so I do occasionally get some kid in their 20s wanting to know something, which is always very gratifying. Or if you find out that a young band covered you, right? Boy, that's a great feeling. I mean, when you get covered by your contemporaries, it doesn't mean anything. But if it skips a generation or 2 generations now, we're going on that almost, right? I mean, and they do one of your songs or they talk about it. That's a very nice thing. That's a very nice thing.
Amazing. But the interesting thing is, because during that period, I mean, you mentioned you had punk, and then you had that post-punk world, and there were bands like, there was the Nightingales, and there was, Public Image Limited, The Fall with Marky Smith, and then Magazine and Gang of Four. And then that sort of period of the early 80s, as you said, there was this kind of idea of it being put into a category called new psychedelia, which there was bands in the UK which were like, I don't know, Medium and Mood 6 had that kind of a slightly modish quality, but you didn't really have a modish quality. You had more of a looser country quality, didn't you, or country or folk quality as well? Because I remember Andy Kershaw really championed the band, didn't he, from the UK?
Yes, dear Andy. I hope he's well. I understand he's had some challenges, as the kids say. Well, like I say, it was sort of just this path that we were on that, later we called, me and Chuck kind of had a epiphany that music is geography, right? So the LA records, early ones, you got those 2 ones, you got the Gravity Talks. Well, you have the EPs too, but the real records, the Slash record, and then the Enigma record, Gas Food Lodging. Yeah, there's a Bird sensibility. There's a New Riders of the Purple Sage sort of. I mean, Lonesome LA Cowboy is still like my anthem. I mean, I love that song so much. So that country rock sort of thing is there. But we didn't sit down and say, let's do this. We just I guess what I'm saying is, as a songwriter, if I can call myself that, you come to the point where you realize there's these tried and true forms cowboy chords and 1-5-4 changes. There's a reason why that is the vocabulary for American music. For I mean, blues and country are the two sides of the same coin,
Mm.
and you either embrace it or you don't, right? And we very much embraced it, and part of it too is we had a very sort of influential roadie that later went on to work for Mazzy Star and stuff, and his name was Tom Cashin. And he would put together he was older than us, and so he would put together these mixtapes when we were touring, and that would really school us on early blues, early country. That's a dump truck over there or something. But it was a natural progression, right? And I know that the British press, there was a lot of Brits that didn't like. I mean, here were these Americans that showed up with beards and stuff. I mean, we really didn't have that, but we were playing guitar music, and everybody else was sort of synthesizer crazy.
Yes, but then that period, I remember we had the early 80s of bands like then U2, Big Country, Simple Minds, and then 83, the Smiths hit, and then suddenly we had something that I think was really, this is indie pop. There's a sort of vibe. There's a lot of different types, but there was people like the Go-Betweens, the Triffids, the Smiths, the June Brides, all these kind of quirky guitar-based bands. Some of them could barely play an instrument, but there was a spirit, and there was all these independent labels. So I think Green on Red became slightly part of that kind of world of, John Peel,
Although,
Andy Herschel.
fortunately, those fans would not like us. The Smiths fans, the crossover in the Smiths and Green on Red is probably zero. And the reasons for that, I don't know. I still today, I mean, come on. I mean, you're sitting there. I hope you have some oxygen to have. I mean, I'm sitting here, how many miles away, and I'm taking up all the oxygen. I was a loudmouth. I said a lot of sort of incendiary things, and I mean, I was trying to turn people off, not on. So our diplomatic sort of skill set wasn't very, the emotional intelligence just wasn't there. Musically, I think we came close when we did No Free Lunch, which oddly enough was recorded at Woolhall, which in Bath, which was Tears for Fears studio. And I think we were the first band that actually had a live drums in there. And that record, which was like a freebie that we gave to Phonogram, that we were signed Phonogram London worldwide. So Polygram was releasing the records in the United States. Very, very reluctantly, by the way. It's like, what are you doing signing an American band, right? And that record, I think, had some sort of a bit of British pop sensibility. And, there's a couple songs on there that could be Kinks tracks, I guess. And if I do say so myself. And but the record company, because that was a freebie we gave them and wasn't the record they were spending money on, they didn't want to promote it. But that record had singles on it. So if they would have thrown some money at that, there's a song on there called Time Ain't Nothing that probably could have been a hit and was sort of played on the radio quite a bit. I mean, it's a weird thing because in the United States, all of our records were college radio top 10.
Mm-hmm.
That chart didn't mean anything. That chart didn't really translate. I mean, the first band in the United States, it's kind of a Smith story. The first band that broke through in my sort of generation was REM, right? And it took them a couple of records, and it took a lot of commitment from, I guess they were on Warner Electra or somebody. It took a lot of money. It took whoever signed them. Maybe it was Joe Smith. I don't know who signed them. You gotta put a lot of fertilizer in there with the seed. And sometimes it doesn't happen right away, and sometimes it happens incrementally. Well, we were never that wasn't going to happen to us. One look at us, we drank a lot, and we later, did a lot of hard drugs, and it's like, no, this first of all, Dan's going to die next week. So, Jeffrey Lee Pierce. I just found out this recently, who I adore. I've always, I love the Gun Club. I love the Cramps. I love the Fall. I love that stuff. A birthday party, and I loved all that. And I found out from a mutual friend that when Jeffrey Lee was in the audience watching us in London, probably around, I don't know, 86, 87 or something, he said to our mutual friend, he said, that guy up there, and he pointed, and he says, he'll be dead before the end of the year. Here before Jeffrey Lee is gone. So life ain't fair.
No.
But I don't know. And also the other thing that happened that didn't help us is that when we were signed in London, we concentrate on touring Europe more than the United States. And that was a huge mistake. And the reason that is because we were encouraged by our record company to do it that way, right? Where we should have kept our fan base in the United States. And then, of course, when I fired two of the members, and they had to find out about it in the music press, that was not good either. Now, in Britain and in the rest of the Europe, they didn't care, because there was this thing like, Mark Smith can have anybody he wants in the band, and it's still the fun kind of thing. Or Nick Cave can put whoever he wants in the band seats, right? Well, that doesn't fly so much in the United States. It's like, is this the band or is this not the band? And, we loved having Chris Kakovitz in the band and Jack. And where are they now? What happened? I thought you guys were friends. Well, they were jettisoned because, Dan is a traitorous bastard, right? We're all really good with each other now, which is beautiful. And if we ever play, we did a reunion back in 2006. You can only really do it once, right? 2007. We might play again when the reissues come out, but it's very clear what Green on Red is. It's got to be the four of us. It's got to be Chuck Prophet, myself, Chris Kakovitz, and Jack Watterson. If they're not, nobody's going to call it Green on Red. We're just not going to do it.
Right. That's kind of strange, isn't it? Because Marky Smith has that famous quote that if it's him and even your granny on bongos, that's still the fool, isn't it? That was his famous line.
Well, and he was, he was a true iconoclast, and however you pronounce that. My written vocabulary is much better than my spoken, and you get that your audience, if they're mostly there, can just pretend that that's the way we say things. But yeah, and with me it was a very cynical. I had a lot of problems with my. It wasn't until about age 50, when my brain broke at age 50, that I really addressed some of the things that was hurting me. And, I'm hoping that today I'm a much more sort of stable person than I was then. I was just not stable. I was a very, very sort of unpredictable to myself and others, and just didn't know how to go through life as a sane adult, right? So, and rock and roll does not help that, right?
No.
If you're out on the road and you're getting fucked up every night, it's a cliche, isn't it? You're out there, you're getting fucked up, you got people that are clapping for behavior that should not be applauded. and then that carries over into your day-to-day life. Well, that's not a healthy situation.
No, that's not. So just, I mean, because what I've realized doing these shows, that most bands have a 5-year lifestyle span, which is, they form, they have 12 months, they fiddle around, especially in the UK. John Peel plays them, they get a John Peel session, they get the first album, do the tour, the second album a bit tricky. By then the band are kind of, and the second or third albums, they realize they hate each other and there's no money. And also the other thing that's with the UK, which is if anybody ever tours America, that always breaks them. They always go, we came back and broke up. You just know those words are going to come out, that it just destroyed us. So it is interesting, the American tour, that most people just can't cope with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. The 5-year thing I think is valid. Chuck Prophet used to say, bands have lives and half lives, just like plutonium. And it's right. I mean, and also everything is sort of a Paul Thomas Anderson movie where your original family wasn't good enough, and so we form these other families as young adults, right? And that's true. Bands are families with everything that goes with that. And so for me with Green on Red, how I'm very close to my actual birth brother, right? I'm my blood brother. He's older than me. He's a cowboy stuntman guy out in LA, and kind of like Henry Fonda. And I'm very, very, who we think Henry Fonda was. Henry Fonda in his personal life wasn't so great, but the film Henry Fonda. But my relationship with Jack, Chris, and Chuck, they're my brothers too. And we went to war together. And we didn't all come back. Alex, the drummer, didn't come back, right? So we all take that. We don't talk about it publicly much. I mean, I always laugh when somebody even says, do you still talk to those guys? Are you still friends? Well, what do you think? Of course we still talk to each other. Now, we don't do it all the time. It's like family. It's not like a daily, but it goes in spurts, right?
Mm.
Sometimes there's nobody else in the world that will understand something that just happened to you, but a specific person from your old band. With me, that's usually Chuck that I'll talk to, because me and Chuck then went on and we had this other sort of thing that happened to us. But Jack as well. I mean, I don't know if you know, Jack is very, very intertwined with the LA, with Adrian Young and the whole sort of wax poetic Southern California post hip hop world. So he's this bald-headed white guy in this scene where he's one of the few Anglos, right? Jack with different people did maybe 3 or 4 NPR Tiny Desk concerts the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, he lives a very interesting life and also owns a music store, etc. And then Chris lives in Germany, and it's basically the 5th member of the Dream Syndicate now too, and and has his life there. And I'm this sort of chronic expat that just drifts around and tries to write books. So it's a very, very sort of beautiful thing that we've got these 4 individuals that are living and thriving in different ways, and that the cliche sort of story that happens to Mark Smith or to Jeffrey Lee Pierce has not happened, which is we're all very aware of and grateful for, because it should have happened. It should have happened based on lifestyle, but it didn't. And so it's a very luck of the draw thing, right? And then to have survived it all, but also to have this relationship with these people where you are brothers. And it is a fraternal thing. It is heavy. It is very, very deep and meaningful, and completely opposite to really what we were doing publicly, right? Which is,
Mm.
I mean, our take was always, it's a bit of a laugh, you know. We're always taking this and making fun of the punters. You know, we were all sort of happy-go-lucky. You know, this is all, and it's all going to end one day, was our attitude. And one day it did. One day it did.
But did you, I mean, during that stage, because I didn't sort of appreciate that until doing these interviews, that, you know, there's kind of the fashion of music, isn't there? There's sort of the 80s in a really simplistic way. There was the kind of, as I said, this kind of indie pop world up to the Smiths. 87 was a particular period. Then they broke up. I know I go on about them, but I did love them. But then you had you had the ecstasy scene came along, and that kind of created a new vibe. And also the next wave of 16 to 18-year-olds, as you remember, kind of wanted their soundtrack. They didn't want a band from another period. And then we had, you know, the grunge scene that came from Seattle. And then after that, we got into Britpop. So you were sort of, you really lasted quite a long time with these kind of musical fashions, hadn't you?
Yeah, I don't know how it, you know, it is true. I mean, we get, because we, outside of the LA period, right? The LA around 82, 83, outside of that, what they now call the Paisley Underground, which we call the Paisley Underwear. that really, you know, what's funny? I was in Mexico City around 2015 to 18, something like that. And I used to say to Danny Amos, who's a guitar player that started Los Straitjackets, you know, with the Mexican mask and the instrumental music. And he used to be in the Rabies, if you remember that instrumental band out of New York, Jody
Yes.
Hare, late 70s. And me and him were like adopted by these kids that were playing this sort of guitar-oriented music and sort of garage rock type things. And I said to him, I said, you know, this is the third scene I've been in. I've only been in 3 scenes. I was in the Tucson punk rock scene, just like Danny Amos was in the Minneapolis punk rock scene before he moved to New York. And then I moved to LA and I was in what was called sort of then the neo-psychedelic scene that became the Paisley Underground. And then I was in this scene in Mexico City. I was never in a sort of roots thing. Americana. I mean, that I hear the word, I get nauseous. I mean, to me, it's a fascist word. You know, it's like, what are you talking about? And if you go into the what was called the Americana scene, I mean, there's no black people. It's like trying to spot black folk at a rockabilly convention. It's not going to happen, you know. And so, how can you? I mean, there's a few exceptions. Okay, there's some exceptions. I don't want to be. But I really did not embrace that, and that was also a bad thing for me politically and artistically, because boy, everybody just loved it. You know, that's what sort of launched Steve Earle and Lucinda Williams and all this stuff, and Wilco, right? Wilco is the poster boy for Americana.
Yes, Jeff Wheely.
To me, it's just yuck. It's a thing that, you know, American music, the reason it is what it is, that you had the Scotch Irish sort of thing that you know came into the Appalachian Mountains, and then you had, of course, the backbeat of Africa. But really, in rural areas, from all that eastern seaboard into the deep south or whatever, if you heard music back in the day, let's say 1920, let's say, and you heard music coming out of some rundown shack, I don't think you could really tell whether there was black folk in there playing or white. Okay, it was the labeling and the branding came later. Okay, race music came later because R&B is because they until Chuck Berry and until they understood that this black music could be sold to a white audience, to white teenagers, you know, it was very, very stratified into these different categories. And so when they come up with Americana, but really what it is just sort of folk music, electrified folk music more than anything, right? It's like, why are you putting that? Americana back in the day was a sort of term about kitschy furniture and stuff, like a wagon wheel chandelier. That's
Yes.
America, right? And this word that I don't think, I mean, I care about words. You know, I don't throw them around. And you know, and it's funny because I know some of the guys that really started that scene. I know the founder of No Depression magazine. I know the DJ in Austin that was one of the first AAA stations, adult art alternative, which is Americana. It's gone away as a platform, you know, programming thing. And I knew the guy out in Gilroy, California. He was a pot dealer. I'm not going to mention his name, a great guy. And he's the one that really launched the Americana radio chart. Okay. This would have been early. And they know what I'm talking about. I can talk to them about what has happened. Right. And they don't say to me, oh, you're full of shit, or that's not true, or you're just bitter. We're all sort of left here with what happened, and it hasn't been good. It hasn't been good for rock and roll. And what was wrong with that word? What was wrong with rock and roll? What was wrong with folk? What was wrong with country? What was wrong with blues? Why did these very useful nouns, sometimes adjectives, why did they sort of become jettisoned for this other way of how we're going to talk about this stuff? To me, it killed a lot of stuff. Okay, I might be, you know, exaggerating here.
But did you think that term was used because I grew up with country music being people like Boxcar Willie, Charlie Pride, Tammy Wynette, Jim Reeves, which was kind of like, that kind of country. And then these guys came along like Uncle Tupelo and Wilco, and then you had Lucinda Williams, and then, you know, Alison Krauss, and it was like, oh, let's not say it's country because that will be like, oh, a bit kitschy. We'll call it Americana.
Well, country rock worked pretty well as a word, right? When you had suddenly the Flying Burrito Brothers and the Byrds kind of reinterpreting what was going on, or who was the famous bluegrass guy that played with his sons and did rock and roll? One of the this is terrible. This is what happens when you're 60. But it's a mixed bag. You know, I'm not a fan of the production of somebody like T-Bone Burnett. You know, to me, he does sort of sepia tones. To me, it's like a fake Matthew Brady photo from the Civil War that's been staged. You know, I mean, I'm a huge Alison Krauss. All those names you mentioned, I'm fans of. You know, I'm a fan of. I mean, I think Steve Earle's a great songwriter. I think Lucinda Williams is a great songwriter. And I just think that the term made it easy for certain people to feel really included, but at the same time, it excluded a lot of people.
So when you listen to Elvis Costello, he did a country album, didn't he, in the mid-'80s? Did you hear that?
You know, Elvis is somebody that, you know, he's one of these guys that wants to be an American. You know, I mean, he's written some fabulous songs. You can't, some of that early, the Attractions records, that's a great band with Pete Thomas on drums. I mean, are you kidding? Steve Naive or whatever on keyboard. I mean, Bruce Thomas. I mean, I know their names, right? So it's like, you just saw my memory is just a shot, but you know, his sort of, he would be sort of up on my dartboard as somebody that has, in my opinion, been unhelpful. Okay. And it's hard for me to articulate exactly what my objections are. You know, there's this thing that happens. You go out to LA, you think you understand it. You spend all your time on the wrong side of Western, right? Western Boulevard. or avenue, whatever it is. It's Boulevard. And you don't understand that the entertainment business is like number 6 or 7 in the economy. That light manufacturing is number 1, that this is a real place. And that the only reason you really have, and it's the capital of Latin America and the Pacific Rim. And the only reason that you have these sort of like images that you're actualizing, these fantasies, is because New York was defining for so many years what LA was. And the reason that happened is because all the publishing world and advertising was really run out of New York, and they didn't want competition over there. They didn't want it to be a series. If you wrote a great, you have to understand, Bukowski didn't get published in the United States. That was, it started with the French and the Germans and stuff,
Well, they love Charles Bukowski, don't they?
So the thing, I guess what I'm saying is it's very easy, and this happens to actors a lot of times. They go out there and they kind of become Americans, and I'm saying you become an American and not in a superficial bad way, right? I mean, Anthony Hopkins, I think, had this realization. He was out there, he was miserable, he was drinking too much. So he went back home, and then he became a serious actor again, It's thing that happens to people.
But what about, because one of my heroes is Lemmy from Motorhead. Now he relocated to LA, and he seemed to it suited his lifestyle of being able just to hang out at the bar, play his kind of machine.
He didn't spend half and half. He spent all his time out in LA.
I think so.
Really? So he survived it. But you know what? That's funny about that, because he might have been doing that, but I don't think he was advertising it.
I think he just,
he's one of my heroes. I met Lemmy the same night that I met the head of Hell's Angels London, and it was at Dingwalls, and Lemmy told me that I belonged in a cage, and his buddy said, said something, and they were going to buy me a pint or something, and I said to the biker, I didn't know who he was. I said, "Oh yeah, a real biker, sure you are." I said, some real Hell's Angel guy's going to come in here and rip the colors off your back. Lemmy looked a little horrified. He thought the guy was going to kill me. And the guy said, "Oh, quite right. You don't know who I am." That's right. We don't know, and he didn't give a shit at all. That could have been my last evening on Earth. But, yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing, right? It's this, I love that we're all different. And although I'm a huge believer in, I'm a globalist, okay? Straight up. I don't believe in the way neoliberal economics have been so unfair to developing nations. I don't believe in extracting wealth from countries and all of that. But in general terms, I believe in a global community, right? But at the same time, I really believe that it's great that we're all different. And that maybe, I hope this is true, that in London, that young people don't have to go and change their accent to get ahead in life. I'm hoping that a working class accent doesn't hurt you anymore. And just like here, I hope that your sexuality or the color of your skin or doesn't hurt what you want to do in life, right? That we all get a fair. So I guess what I'm saying is my objections about some of this, I believe in the United States also as a symbol. It's important. There's a reason why immigrants still come here. And one of the main reasons why they still come is nobody cares whether you have papers. If you want to buy, what is the first thing an immigrant does in the United States, and probably in the UK too, is they buy property, and nobody's going to take it from them as long as they can pay the mortgage, and you don't have to show proof of citizenship in this country to own a house, So that's the thing. It's like it still matters. That's why New York City still matters. I mean, New York City is a caricature of itself. It's exactly what it used to accuse LA of being all these years. It's empty and it's vapid and it's it's horrible. It's like Orlando now, right? It's a cartoon of itself. But still, there's Queens. You go up there to Queens and there's 100 languages spoken in a square mile. That's American to me. Whoever comes here first. I mean, whoever just got here is the most American to me. My dad was an immigrant. I married an immigrant. My son is the child of an immigrant. I still believe in the American dream. But at the same time, I object to people having to leave where they don't want to leave in order to have a chance, right? And if you look at what's happened at the border, it's a lot of Central Americans. Well, if you look at the history of the United States foreign policy in places like Honduras and Guatemala, it's not pretty.
No.
So we're the ones that are causing a lot of that. And the thing that's hardest about this country, David, I just cannot abide by, is we just don't have any curiosity about the rest of the world. The rest of the world is so curious about us, or used to be. They're not anymore because we become so horrific. But we just don't give a shit about how anybody does anything differently anywhere. Boy, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yes, but you are quite excited. You are quite excited with our royal family and castles, aren't you? Let's face it.
How old is that? Is the first question an American tourist asks, and how much did it cost? Those are the two. I mean, that's the other thing. Yeah, I mean, this latest thing that happened, you have to understand is I don't follow popular culture in the way that I really even I understand some old, Prince Philip died, okay, and then there's some problems with one of the kids and the wife, okay, all right, I get that. But I barely know what a Kardashian is. I don't know really what a Kardashian is. And in fact, I had this conversation last night with my son and his girlfriend because they were very interested in the OJ trial, right? They're 23, and the OJ trial is what really launched a lot of this sort of reality TV. Networks found out that for very little money, they could do this freak show that people tuned into, and still today, if you turn on CNN, you're not going to see news. All the nighttime people like Don Lemon or Anderson Cooper, I don't know what it is. It's a very cheap way to have some sort of topic every night that really doesn't illuminate much.
Yes, this is true. I know reality TV is awful. But look, just going back, did you just going back slightly, when you went to record your last couple of albums with Green on Red, this is the sort of early 90s, was it kind of the sense when you were in the studio that you felt that this was going to be the last album, so to speak?
Well, first of all, it stopped when me and Chuck went and did Here Come the Snakes in Memphis, the second Memphis record with Jim Dickinson. And because I thought I was doing a solo record. I showed up, and then the company that gave us the money to do that went bankrupt. And we were signed to a publishing deal, and they ran around, and they had a record company part of their publishing concern. They had a physical, side. And they said, well, we'll put it out, but you got to call it Green on Red. So it was the first time that in the music business, or really the first time in my life, that I'd done something completely against who I thought I was. So it was over then. So Green on Red ended with Here Come the Snakes, which is in my opinion, is a very good record. I mean, when I look back at Green on Red, I think half the records are okay and half of them are not so great. And that was one of the better ones. And then me and Chuck continued with just sort of session players and session road guys. But it was over, right? Meaning we kept going because we were on salary, right?
Mm.
And we had publishing advances and stuff like that. So we just kept going because we didn't know what else to do. I mean, what are you supposed to do? I mean, by the time we did the Glenn Johns record in LA, and as you probably know that name, Glenn Johns is a huge legacy producer from the Who and the Stones and all of that. Well, we had nothing. I had nothing. I had nothing to say. I had nothing to give. Extraordinarily expensive record done at Ocean Way Studios. Terrible record, just an awful record. But I didn't know what to do with I had no place to do but be in that long stay hotel. You know, I mean, I had nowhere to go. I had no home. My life was down to one guitar in one hand and a suitcase in the other, literally. So I just kept, I didn't know what to do. What I should have done is just disappeared and regrouped. And hopefully, if I had something to say a couple years later, come back and do something.
Yes.
But I didn't have the courage. I didn't have the willpower to do that. I was a coward. And so I do this record. And then we got lucky on the record after that. We did a record with Al Cooper in Nashville. That was a fun, kind of good record. But was it green on red? No, it was me and Chuck Prophet, So it's a shameful thing that also had some sort of artistic merit to it, because those records are okay. They're pretty good, some of them, like outside of the Glenn Johns records. So
yes.
I guess the thing is those last 3 or 4 green on red records, I don't know what they were. They were sort of the monster with 2 heads, instead of 4 heads.
Yes. And did you did a BBC Made of L session though, didn't you, as well?
We did a bunch of BBC sessions that somebody put out at some point. The BBC was always really kind to us, except for John Peel. He hated us. Bob Harris liked us. I saw John Peel once I was at the BBC doing something, and he came down to the reception to pick up some Chinese takeout or something. I forget what it was. And Chuck says, "Look, it's John Peel." And I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, John," I said, why don't you play us? I said, look, I'll tell you what, you play the next record, I'll go down on you. That didn't go over good. He just said, no, thank you. And of course, I love John Peel, right? So it's one of those things, you don't. I think Whispering Bob Harris was our benefactor more than John Peel.
And Andy Kershaw. So then what did you do, regroup for the 90s? How did you navigate that decade?
Well, I didn't. I was living in Madrid, and I had a really bad dope habit.
Was that, by the way, was that Madrid in America?
No, Madrid in Spain.
Okay, because there's a Madrid which is near New Mexico, isn't there, which we drove through once and stopped.
There's a bunch of those. There might be one in Missouri too, I think, because they call it the Madrid fault line, right? Of that huge earthquake that happened in the late 19th century.
Yeah,
it was an earthquake that happened where the Mississippi ran backwards.
Because I think that's sort of south of Albuquerque. Oh, so you went to Spain. Why did you go to Spain again?
And I was married to this gal from Barcelona, and I had a very expensive and bad dope habit, and I moved. That's a Gila woodpecker. He's right. Oh, he said, "No, that's a thrasher. Go away, thrasher. Hey, he's right there right now." They're loud. They're like aggressive birds too. Anyway, so I came back to the United States. I didn't know what to do. I was scared I was going to die. And hey, let me see. Let me find something. Hey, go away. So so I went back I cleaned up, and and my wife joined me at some point. We were separated, and we had a child. And I get all into this in the new book. My new novel is all about me cleaning up in the '90s here, and gets involved with. Hey, I'm gonna. What's this right now? Tell me. Hey, you're a cheeky lad. Hey. Okay. So anyway, as I cleaned up, and I got a job, a regular office job. I was painting on a paint contracting crew full of ex-junkies and stuff. And from that, I made it into an office. I call it my missing years. And
Yes.
my wife was in grad school, and she went from London party girl to intellectual, and got her degree, and now is a professor in New York. And we had a son who's out here visiting me now. And I just tried to, I didn't know what a normal person was. I hadn't been sort of a stable person since I was like 10. And here I was, 30, 32 years old, and had no life skills, nothing outside of rock and roll. So I did that, and then played a lot of golf, which is a huge cliche, right?
Yeah, Alice Cooper.
And I try to get somebody like you have the manuscript. Try getting anybody to read a crime novel that has recovery in it with golf. It's like the most unpopular topics of all time, But I do think that if we do digital marketing and we target, golfers with substance abuse problems that also like crime fiction and indie rock, there's got to be 30,000 of those guys.
Yeah, you've got it. Absolutely.
Anyway, that's what I did. I wrote some screenplays with a friend out here who was a movie producer. Nothing got made, but I got paid a couple times, and I tried to learn how to write a little bit. And then I moved to New York, and same thing. Got paid to write a biopic of Nikola Tesla. And I've always wanted to be a writer. I always felt like a fish out of water in music, always. But I feel very comfortable in the literary world, and and I have my causes. Like I believe that we have too much MFA fiction, Masters of Fine Arts, where people talk about the blues of being in grad school. I'm trying to bring back some sort of pulp sensibility. The first book was just a false memoir. It was sort of written like a punk rock thing. And then the second book was a real novel about, life down in Oaxaca and being very in a severe depressive episode and surviving that. And the new one is just a breezy sort of Elmore Leonard thing, that takes place in Arizona in the 90s. And I'm hoping that little by little, I can crawl my way and write a book every few years. And hopefully by the time I die, I'll have, half a dozen books to go along with all those sort of dubious records.
Yes. So when you mentioned, up to the age of 50, you had a moment when you were hit 50 where you suddenly had to clean up. Was that, just emotional or spiritual or sort of drug related?
Well, I as far as drug addiction, I cleaned up as far as, that sort of stuff, back sort of mid 90s, lasted for 10 years. And then I decided to be a civilian again. And, so I started drinking and smoking weed again, which has not been a problem. So all of those sort of horror stories that you hear about that is taught, and I don't want to get into the whole politics and the not based on scientific truth of addiction and all of that. But what happened at 50 is that I was in New York and my marriage imploded like kind of did in the early 90s, but not based on these issues. And I just sort of, I mean, I had what they used to call a nervous breakdown, right?
Hmm.
Where I couldn't sleep and I couldn't eat, and I wound up in a psych ward, and I had a Russian shrink tell me, he said, Mr. Stewart, he said, I understand what's going on with you. I think I do, he said. And he says, I've seen psychotic and you're not quite there. But here's the medication that you might find useful. You might want to, mess with the dosage. And so I went on to this antipsychotic when I was 50, and very low dosage. And this funny thing about life is that, my marriage was over and I went down to Oaxaca. And geez, you could get that medication down in Mexico over the counter. So yeah, that beats getting codeine over the counter in Spain in 1990, right? And so it just all sort of worked for me. And I started putting it together sort of day by day, and the beauty of Mexico is Mexicans are really good at living in the moment. They're kind of Buddhists that way, and they can be very, very satisfied with very little sort of material. I mean, Mexicans know how to be happy in the moment. They can do it.
Mm.
And at the same time, they're very fatalistic, right? At the same time, they know that what's coming is not going to be good. But they can really enjoy a day like today. It's such a, like, I'm really understanding how hot it's going to be in a few weeks. So right now it's 90 out, which is very pleasant in Tucson because there's no humidity. And I can just I'm in this house that I bought a house that was a rundown, hadn't been lived in for years, a tiny little sort of thing. And I had friends that helped me sort of turn it into something. And I can't believe it's happened. I can't believe that I've got this place that's like a writer's studio. It'd be a perfect place for a painter.
Mm.
There's like very high ceilings, and I've got all this light that floods in, but I'm not a painter. But it's gratifying to know that if a painter did find they would find it useful, right? And so I just feel sort of really, grateful that I turned 60. That was a huge deal. I never thought I would make 60. And we have this, I don't know if this is happening in the UK, but in the United States, nobody wants to be old. And I don't understand it. And they'd never retire. I mean, I understand if you can't retire because economically you can't. That's a separate, right? But there's people that just want to stay in power forever. And I'm not necessarily talking about Joe Biden because he's sort of the exception that proves the rule, okay? I mean, I have no problem with him where he's at right now. I mean, I'm grateful he's in there. But there's so many other people that just they do not. I remember when a 60-year-old, 70-year-old, they sat in the corner. They were glad to get a cup of tea and a bit of cake and write checks for the grandchildren.
Yes.
They knew they didn't have to be the straw that stirred the drink anymore. So I hope to put another 10 years together. That would be wonderful. But I have no illusions that I'm going to be some sort of 80, 90-year-old. My body's been through too much. I'm already going through I've got some health issues, whatever, that I'm dealing with, but like everybody, but I'm happy to be old. I'm happy to be, and to cheerlead the kids. And if they want it, I have a bit of advice, if they want it. But I'm not going to tell them what to do or how to act or how to feel or what's fair.
Yes.
It's like woke culture, like this book I just wrote. If some woke kid wants to say, hey, you're a 60-year-old Anglo from a privileged background, and you have a bunch of Mexican American characters in this book, and I don't think that's cool. I wouldn't argue with him or her or they. I would just take my lumps. I mean, how many years has it been of the patriarchy? How many centuries? If it takes 3 or 4 centuries for the pendulum to swing back, I'm fine with that. You know, people bitching about it, people bitching about cancel culture and all of this. Hey, you know, you didn't bitch about it when you know, you gladly took all the benefits of when it was the other direction. Now it's the wind has changed, you know.
Yes, yes.
Right?
I know.
So
We did.
anyway, I'm happy to be alive, David, and I'm
Yes.
happy like you gives a shit to fucking call me and listen to me fucking rant.
So because in the last decade you've written, but you also recorded sort of material as well, haven't you? So you've been, this last decade has been quite active, hasn't it? With and sort of playing with your old mates as well.
You know, I mean, I like I said, I'm proud. I managed to do it in 2 different eras, and I'm done with music. I'm not saying that melodramatically. It's just I did a trilogy that I'm very proud of. Right? I did this Marlowe Billings thing, and I've done it both with the books and with the music. And I really believe that the LP is dead. Famous last words, because we thought the novel was dead in the early '70s. But I just think that it's singles now, and it's just not my thing. And I grew up with the album, right? I grew up with 20 minutes of music aside, and you either got up and turned it over, or you didn't. You didn't pick up the needle to to not play that song you don't like, right?
Mm.
So it's just a different time and place, and I don't. The studio itself has changed, right? What is a recording studio? I mean, it doesn't really exist anymore, and I come out of those days too. So I've had my fill. You know, I've done 4 solo records. That's quite enough. I did one in the '90s and 3, as you said, from 2010 to around 2017, 18, I guess. And I've said my piece, right? Just give me a bit of cake. I'll sit in the corner and listen to what you did.
But then,
Right.
then when, you know, one of your bandmates says, "Oh, by the way, you know, and after this lockdown, do you fancy just having a bit of a jam again?" Do you do you think, "Oh, actually, it's been a bit of a drag. I'll be quite keen to play again," you know, just as a bit of a jolly?
I'm not saying that I don't want to play music anymore. As far as with Green on Red, it wouldn't go down that way. The way it would go down is that somebody would be offering some serious money. Straight up, you're right. You know, they would be like, "Hey, you know, everything's kind of come full circle again, and you know, let's go out and make some money." Because you see, we really didn't make money back in the day, right?
Hmm.
So we don't feel guilty about that part of it at all, you know. And then it would be, okay, where are we going to get together? And then we would show up, and we would have a set list based on stuff, and we would just get right to it, right? And that would be a blast. It would be a lot of fun. And so maybe that'll happen, maybe not. As far as just playing locally or still touring as a solo artist internationally, you know, that depends. I need to get 2 new hips, right? I need both hips replaced, and I can't tour right now because of that. You know, I have a lot of, you know, I have a cane. It's not a walker. I'm not in a wheelchair, but there's no way I could tour until that happens. So that's at least a couple years of the surgery and the coming back from it. And locally, you know, I have some players around here that we enjoy playing with each other. And I did a Wednesday night thing in Tucson when I first moved here, every Wednesday night at the Dusty Monk, and that was a lot of fun. But it ran its course. And so, yeah, I love to play, I will do that. But
Yes.
you know, I used to say that the best musicians never leave their porch because they don't have a neurotic need to perform. I mean, the thing, you know, let's just be clear. Anybody that is in the entertainment business, from an actor to a musician, anybody that wants to put themselves on display in an exhibitionist type way, that's not coming from a good place. You know,
Yeah.
even Bob Marley. That's not coming from a good place. That's coming from a hole inside. And that's beautiful. So you become a performer. I mean, think about somebody like Nina Simone, right? I mean, she's such a compelling artist, you know. But what was driving it all? What was driving it all was not pretty.
Mm-hmm.
It was not life. It was not life affirming. I mean, it could be, but there was also a lot of sadness and anger there, right? So, you know, I just don't feel I just don't feel like I need to get my yayas out, you know, and at the same time, I really, you know, writing used to be such a laborious process, and now I find it to be sort of much more fun, if I can use that word, if writing can ever be fun. I don't know if it's fun, but it's certainly not, you know, I don't feel like I'm being tortured. And I enjoy it. I get up really early, you know. It's like, yeah, another one of those cliche stories, you know. I get up at 6. It's very easy for me to sit down at the $100 Chromebook I have and knock out some stuff. And 3 or 4 hours go by, and by that time, I'm ready to come outside and feed some birds, you know.
Yes. So with your latest book, did you do a lot? Was it a case that you had to do a lot of rewriting and sort of going back over it?
No, the second book was difficult. That one's called The Unfortunate Demise. So I've skipped around. So the first one was named after the first record. What was that one called? I can't even remember now. Something Marlowe Billings. That's another senior moment. I don't even know the name of my first solo record. And then this one is Marlowe's Revenge, which is the second record.
Right.
And so the first book was me, punk rock days, Tucson, going to LA. The second book was 2015, 2016 in Oaxaca. And this book is me in the 90s, okay? And actually, it sort of wrote itself. I mean, all those things that used to hang me up on the second book, I got, you know, you survive in all of it, right? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to figure out something that you want to figure out about what happened to yourself. And at the same time, you're trying to solve this thing. And so when you solve it, you realize that the muse will help you if you just let it, right? So this one, I just let it rip, you know. And the second record was like that a lot. The Marlowe's Revenge record was very loose. So this one, it was not this big, heavy character coming out of a psychiatric episode, you know. This was just me. And then, I mean, sure, he's kicking dope and he's getting clean, but he's also in his 30s, so he has a little bit more resilience. And yeah, I'm happy. I mean, I'm sort of on tenterhooks right now because I'm waiting for my readers, and I'm waiting for editors and stuff to chime in. But so far, I guess they trust me now. So and I don't really need anybody to hold my hand anymore.
Mm.
Right? That happens in music too. You get to the point where you don't need somebody to hold your hand in the studio. You know how to do it. So at this point, it's just like, yeah, I know how to write a book.
Have you got more sort of protective over your books than you did your records? Does this feel much more personal?
Do I feel much more, what did you say?
Protective of your, you know, the books, you know, or do you feel much more exposed with the books, you know, the writing process with the, you know, the novels rather than the music?
What I've noticed, like I was just sort of at a dinner party, right? It was outside and we're spaced. But I was there with, like, you know, I'll mention a name. One of the people there was Stacy Richter, who wrote 2 really highly regarded collections of short stories. She's a very funny writer. And what I've noticed, and then I'm there with this other guy that's produced Hollywood films and whatever. And I'm there, and what I notice is what I want to talk about is the nitty gritty emotional shit of some of these books, right? because we're all narcissists. Anybody that is in the performing arts, and even if now you become a writer, you're a fucking narcissist. And but nobody's really interested. Nobody really gives a shit. So what they give a shit if they read it is they want to know whether they want to have fun with it, or they want it to challenge them or something, right? Like Graham Greene, who is one of my heroes, absolute heroes. He broke his books down into the serious ones like Power and the Glory, and then what he called entertainments like Our Man in Havana, right? But the truth is what he considered sort of lightweight. That stuff has some of his best shit, right? So I'm kind of at that point. I'm kind of at the point where I wouldn't mind actually selling some books, right? And it doesn't scare me to write something that's sort of that it's not a big heavy thing. Like this book is not a heavy. The last one was kind of heavy, whereas this one is just sort of like absurdist a little more. And I like to say that they're all the songs, the books, this interview, it's 65% true. Because that's how we sort of go through life, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there was a very interesting film, on Robert Lloyd from the Nightingales, and he was telling his story and other people were telling the same story, but it was different, and they were going, well, this is all, everyone's got a false narrative here, haven't they, of this kind of past, but at the end of the day.
Famous Kurosawa, right? It's the famous samurai movie, right? Or Shonen or something. Russian on, however you pronounce it. Exactly right. Everybody's blowing smoke up their ass, but it's not. We do it because we need to survive. Denialism is not denialism, denialists. But to be in denial about certain things about your own behavior and stuff, that's how, if not, how would you live? I just had an old girlfriend come over that I lived with for 8 years. She lives in LA, and we lived together in this period of time that we were talking about, so when I was 18 to 26. And it was really hard she didn't have any agenda. She's a wonderful person, and she brought me this poster of our first Green on Red gig, opening for X in LA, this beautiful poster. And but a couple things came up that were hard to hear, right? And she didn't say them in a way to be mean or anything, but it was things that I had repressed, forgotten. I mean, memory is a very elusive thing, no?
Mm-hmm.
And so exactly right. And by the way, on these reissues, we're not, I guess they're going to do some sort of liner notes that I've objected to. But what I've done is I've kind of organized a false oral history. So it's not people recorded on tape because I refuse to do the transcription. But it's people sending in their memories or certain events. And then I've been chopping it up and putting it into the form of an oral history, right?
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's everybody has different memories of how something happened or whether it ever did. So if you live long enough, you get to experience stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. So did you say these reissues are coming out, or have they started coming out?
No, there'll be the first one, which covers roughly 1979 to about 84.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be out. It won't be this year, but it'll definitely be in 2022. So that'll be the first, and then we'll start sort of, the next one will not be, it'll probably a year or two later. So it'll be sort of bam, 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 but all within about no longer than 5 years.
You
right?
sure?
Yeah. So I'm excited about that because, there's all this revisionism now, right? And you kind of got to jump in or somebody else will try to decide what happened. And I've
Yes.
noticed a lot of it is not true. What they're trying to sort of, a lot of people are like got a lot of axes to grind, and I've just seen stuff that isn't the way it went down, in my opinion. So we all want to jump into that and
Yes.
to say, okay, this is our take.
And what record label has taken this on?
Well, we're doing it mostly with help with Chris Metzler, who has Decor. He puts out bands like Richmond Fontaine, and he's a booking agent too of like Chuck Prophet and stuff. And he's doing also American Music Club. So he's a kid. He's been in London for a long time, but he's from Oregon.
Right.
Or that's DECOR. So we'll be doing it with them in conjunction with our own entity, yet to be named.
Have you
Probably.
found will this include kind of demos and sort of other recordings that never?
You bet. It's gonna have stuff that I find absolutely non-interesting. You got to be a completist nowadays. I mean, I heard about that there's a Stooges reissue that has like 15 versions of "I Want to Be Your Dog." It's like, why? But fans want it. So we're the trouble that we're running into is every band should have some sort of archivist, right?
Yeah.
Like the Rolling Stones, that's Bill Wyman, right? Wyman has it all, right? He has the vaults of photographs. I mean, he just collected it all. But we really, I mean, I'll give you an example. The first EP, the master track, the master tape, 2-inch, 16 track. I sold that for a bag of weed back in the day. Think about that. Think about how irresponsible that is.
Crazy.
Right? So I'm not proud of it. I'm just telling you the truth. This would have been around, I probably sold that tape around 1985 or something. That's just, so we don't, I mean, Chuck has a suitcase full of shit. Jack has one. Chris has some. But if you go into this new house of mine right here, I don't have anything. I don't have, I have a suitcase of like the last tour's merch, right? What's left. And I have a single copy of my books. But that's it. I don't have any old Green on Red records. I don't have any old Green on Red things. It's like what Lou Reed said years ago. He said, I don't want to listen to that shit. I made it. Why would I listen to it?
Yes. But did you ever find out? Did you ever locate the tape? Did anybody come out of the woodwork and go, actually, I've got the tape?
Oh, of that EP.
Yeah.
I don't think we found the 2-track master. But what we do have is somebody probably has in fact, I know they do, has the test pressing, right?
Yeah.
The original test pressing, and we have a couple copies vinyl that have never been played, right? And that record sells for the first one, if it's a real one, because it's been bootlegged, it sells for, I don't know, last time I checked, like 200 pounds or something. So yeah, we're trying, we're not skimping out. We're trying to, wherever possible, get original tapes. And if not, we go back to the closest we can get to the source. And then when we remaster, we don't remaster in a way to make it sound fresh and new for this era.
Mm-hmm.
We do it the way it would have been done back then. Because I can't stand that. I have a Tidal account because I was bitching about Spotify or something, and an executive at Tidal saw it on social media, and he gave me a VIP account. And one of the things I noticed because I have no record collection or anything, I listen to music through a $30 Anchor sound bar,
Hmm.
But one thing I noticed was so much of the stuff that's been remastered, it's awful. It doesn't sound like it did when, and I don't expect it to sound like vinyl did through a good stereo.
Hmm.
I just want it to sound like it did, whether, because you see my era and your era, because you're old enough to remember this. We listen to music in all sorts of different ways. Everything from a jukebox to an AM radio in a car that's just one shitty speaker to a
Yes,
really
absolutely.
stereo system. So we're used to hearing things in different ways. But when I hear that sort of like really loud, cold, brittle, I go, that's not the way that sounded. It happened to me recently listening to a Traffic, who was one of my favorite bands, Traffic from back in the day, Steve Winwood and all of that. And I said, that's not the way that sounded. I could hear too much separation too,
Right.
and sometimes being able to hear the drums that good. Well, that's not the way it sounded. I mean, nobody really heard it. We only felt the kick drum back in the day. We didn't really hear it,
Yeah.
So I'm not a big sound file. I'm not an audiophile. I'm the opposite. So I think we just had a discussion amongst ourselves that said, let's try to get stuff sounding kind of like it did when we were listening to the final mix in the studio.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we want. Yeah.
Nice. Nice.
Have I answered all your questions?
Yes, just one last one. I mean, if you could have said something, I always say ask this. Just if you could said something to your 16 or 18-year-old self starting out, is there any sort of little bit of advice or words of wisdom that you would just say, oh, by the way, just do this, kid, or don't do that?
I don't know. I mean, my thing, yeah, try to wake up interested. That's the thing. Oh, and the other thing, I guess I would have said this. I would have said, there's many right roads, but there's only one wrong road. And if you're on it, turn around, right? That's what I would have told that 16-year-old.
Yes.
And by the way, you've interviewed me before, true?
No.
Really?
No.
I had the funniest feeling of deja vu, especially when you asked that question. I said, this guy's asked me that before, but we haven't. It's been a most delightful conversation, and it really has. And if you're ever in my neck of the woods, if you're ever in the Southwest, because I'm going to kind of be here for a while, I would feel hurt if you didn't reach out and we'll go have a beer somewhere or eat a burro.
We'll definitely do that. We'll definitely, hopefully next year.
Wonderful. Yeah. I mean, I might even hop in the car with you and go see the Grand Canyon again. Okay?
Let's do that. It's always a nice one. Take care.
Okay. Well, yes, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Take care. See you later. Bye-bye.
Don't be a stranger. See you later. Okay. Bye. Cheers.
And that is a very long interview, and that is also the end. I'm sure someone's listening still. Anyway, that was me in conversation with Dan Stuart, one-time member of Deep Green on Red, talking about life, love, poetry. As if you're listening still. Anyway, this is David Eastaugh, the C86 Show. If you want to contact me, you can on Spotify, iTunes, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's the one. Just do C86 Show. And also, all these have been archived. You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's a true story. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.